right, today we are going to talk about what I think is the most important thing in photography, other than is it in focus, and that is exposure. If it's too light or too dark, and then you try to fix it later, it just doesn't look as good. And now I know the old shoot it in RAW and fix it later, that to me is a cop-out. I mean, do you really want those large file sizes? Do you really want to spend all that time afterwards fixing something? Especially if you're in video. If you shoot video RAW, my God, you must be a real glutton for punishment. Those file sizes bogging down your computer. You know, there's nothing like getting it right the moment you push the shutter and it's done. You don't have to do anything after the fact, and it's done, and it looks great. So you got to learn the basics of exposure if you really want to be into photography or video or anything like that. It's just that simple. And looking at the screen on the back of a camera, you can't go by that. It might look perfect on, how many times have you said, wow, this looks perfect, this looks great. And then you take the picture of the video and you go, this looks horrible, right? I mean, you can't go by this. Just because it looks perfect on here doesn't mean it's going to be great in here. It might be way too light or too dark. And you said, yeah, but it looks so good on the screen. So I'm going to show you how to nail the exposure perfect every time. When you do it right, there's the color and the detail is so amazing. It's like as if you can't see very well. Your eyes aren't that great. And you go to an eye doctor and he gives you glasses for the first time. You go, whoa, that's what it's like when you expose properly. The colors are so rich. The detail is so amazing. And then as opposed to being too light or too dark and you go in your editing program and you try to fix it and you bring it up or down, it just looks muddy. It doesn't look as good. Anyway, so I'm going to show you how to nail it. I'm going to show you 3 different ways to do it. You can use this. Now, here's a myth, I guess, a misunderstanding, or a lot of people believe this is 50%. So if you have a histogram, this is exactly 50%. And it is for some cameras, but not for all cameras. I did a study. I actually spent all day yesterday testing all my cameras with this, and they were all over the place. It is 50% for the A7 III, the A7S III, and the A7C. Perfectly right in the middle. For the RX10 Mark IV, it's 35%. The Canon G70 is 20%, way down at the end. The GX850 is 60%, so it's way up over here. And the C100 Mark II, if you have the white lines, it's up to like 65%. So the white lines throw it off. So if you try to zoom in on only the gray part, which is kind of sucky that it has this thing right in the middle of it here, but it makes a difference if you're shooting just gray or have the white lines on there too. This one might not be exactly the same as this. Don't be fooled. There's different brands. They look the same. They are so different in gray value and color value. So you gotta, whatever you have, you gotta really dial it in, figure out what you got. Okay, so what you do is, most cameras have histograms. Let me show you here. There, you change your exposure until it's halfway. That's the first way to do it. Most cameras have histograms, but if you don't, you see this thing down here? That's another way to do it. You want to get it in the middle there. Like I said, this is not 50% for all cameras. Some cameras are 20%, some cameras are 60%, or 10%, or whatever. So that it's kind of hard to remember that. So what I did, this is a clever thing Marcus did here, is I went and I got gray scales of paper. I tested this with different cameras. This one here is 50% with the G7 and an A7R5. This one, which is lighter, is 50% with a G100, an RX100 Mark VII, and an LX10. This one, which is even lighter, is 50% for a G70. Let's say I'm using a G100. Then I would hold this in front of my face and fill this with the camera, so it's like that, and make the histogram exactly 50% by exposing it properly. And I know it would be perfect. If I was using a G7 or an A7R5, I would use this one because I know this is exactly 50%. So like I said, see how these are different? These are different values than that. So this is how different the cameras are. So that's one way to do it, is to find something that matches your camera exactly. Now, what if you have a whole bunch of cameras like me? Well, that could drive you crazy. So that takes me to this thing. Now, I talked about this in the last video. Get the one that's matte, not shiny. And it has a bunch of gray values. So what I do is before a shot, I have the person or the subject, or I put it in the shot, right where the most important part of the shot is, I put this. And then enables zebras in the camera. And the zebras make stripy lines at a certain point, and you can set that. You can make it for 70%, 80%, 90%, 100%, whatever. And each camera has a different sensitivity with zebras, so that's all different too. I set it up so, for example, this one here, this first white one, I set the zebras so this one will have lines on it, but not the one next to it or the one next to it. I have all my cameras dialed in, so only this one, number one, is blinking with zebras, not the one next to it. So that's so easy. For in a shot, you just have somebody hold it, you get your camera, and you just dial in the exposure, so only number one is blinking, but nothing else. This is probably the best way to do it because it's the most portable. You just take this in your camera case, and then you have somebody hold it up, you dial in. So no matter where you are, no matter where you're outside, you're inside, it's dark, it's light, it's whatever, it's mystery. You just hold this up and you make it so this one has the zebras. And again, each camera is different. This camera might have a zebra at 80% to have the first one blinking. This camera might be blinking at 95%, whereas another camera is at 100%. So figure out the method that you want to use, and then just spend a few minutes to figure out where only making the first one blink. What should the zebras be set at? 80%, 90, 95, 100. And again, each camera is different. What I did yesterday, only a nerd would do this, is I went through all my cameras and I listed the zebras at here's example, RX100 Mark 7. The zebra comes in at 100 for the first square. They're all different here. Like the C100 Mark II comes in at 80 plus 0.5%. I did the zebras, then I did the gray card, and then I did the paper. So I have all three different methods for each camera that I have. So the first one is this, if it works. The second one is this, and the third one is this. So I have three different methods, and I can choose whichever I want. This one doesn't come in you might think this is the most easiest one to use. It's going to be if you have a camera that this is, if you're doing a histogram and it comes in at 37%, like it's not in the middle, it's gonna be hard to remember. So I only use this with cameras where this is exactly 50%. And remember, the white lines, especially this one, can throw it off. If you're gonna do the overall thing, write down what the reading is. For example, the C100 Mark II, if you do the whole thing, it's like 56% on the histogram. If you only take the gray part, then it's 50%. So keep that in mind. So here's what you do. Take some test pictures and check them on your computer until you get the perfect exposure. Then figure out the right zebra or gray card setting to match that exposure. And from that moment forward, just use that gray card or that zebra setting, and you should have perfect exposure every time with that camera. Of course, remember, every camera is different. Once you do it once or twice, you get used to it, and then it's easy. But from that moment on, no matter what situation you're in, you can dial in and have the perfect exposure every time. And that is what a difference it makes when you have it exposed properly. Not only do you not have to do any more work after that, it's done. Your work is done. You don't have to do post work, but the quality of the video and the image is just so much better. The colors are richer. Everything is just so much better, and you feel so much better as a result too. Anyway, so just do a little bit of homework. That's all I'm saying is find the color that works for your camera and just take that with you. Like an example, if I'm taking a photo shoot with this camera and this is the paper that works with it for 50%, then I would just take this. I don't need to take all this other stuff. Or I could use this method, and then have the zebra set to that. Because some cameras, for example, the G70 doesn't have a histogram. It only has zebras, and then the zebras is only 70 and 100. Like it doesn't give you a lot of choices with zebra settings. You can't do 85 or 96 or something like that because it's more of a consumer thing. So figure out what works for your camera, and that's what I'm saying. So it makes such a difference, and you really won't know how great your life is until you actually get perfect exposures each time and you go, wow, If only I've known this years ago. Like, just think about it. From this moment forward, you could have perfect exposures every time. Now, I know there's wedding photographers and run and gun people who just have to shoot raw because you don't know your situation's too fluid. You can't do so. But most people, come on, you're doing YouTube videos. You're sitting there, your camera's not changing. You can spend a minute and do a proper exposure. And then the whole video is perfect. I mean, how many times have you shot a video and you spent an hour doing it and the exposure sucked and you were too light or too dark and you tried to fix it and it just looked all muddy and it wasn't really good, or you have to render it in some massive file? It just makes your life so much better to spend a little time and do it right in the first place. And that's it. So I think exposure is one of the most important things in photography, other than is it in focus. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed my video. I'm up here. This is me. Okay, I'm saying goodbye. I will talk to you later. Until the next video, bye-bye.